This is the Lorita, owned by Mungo Montgomery for Bury, gently nosing into the landing point on the island of Swona. On board are his sea angling guests, Robert Broch, Neil Corsi and John Finlay, who at short notice have just left the fishing ground at the south-east of the island. Mungo had spotted Sir Lionel's boat going into the little harbour, and had reckoned that since Cyril was the owner of Swona, there was a chance that we could be invited to come ashore. All was in order, and Cyril requested that we stay on board until the crew members of the Pole Star, lying offshore, have completed the servicing of the minor light. It's high water, and their tender is lying at the slipway, but it's no long before they're reversing out and making their way back to the northern lighthouse vessel Pole Star. Sir Lionel was contracted to carry out maintenance work on behalf of the lighthouse board, and today, since the weather was good, he'd taken his son along for a trip. Permission was granted to film and to have a look around, and we took the opportunity to film the relics that remain at the head of the haven, and getting snippets of information for Cyril on the Fergie tractor, the winch and the barge that was used to transport the tractor to the island, and of course the hood. Shortly after we set off to explore this little group of buildings with absolutely no prior knowledge of their history. First impressions was of a dwelling house with stone-built buildings in close proximity to provide shelter, and then, since the door was open, we went inside to be confronted by a relic for the past. Was this a stove bought off the shelf, or had the owner ingeniously designed it? An amazing contraption. And just look at the improvised forerunner to the electric kettle on the floor to the left. The whole ground floor was new open plan, and the living room end had an intriguing plaque attached to the wood surround of the fireplace, hinting at some World War II activity. Back outside and standing in the ruin of a very old cottage with its floor carpeted in scentless mayweed. The building has the form and structure of a kiln, and we were wholly unaware of its purpose, and especially intrigued as to why this ladder is housed in it. This is the house that was occupied by the Rosies, two brothers and a sister, the family that had left Ireland in 1974. This beautiful vase is a sad reminder of their occupation. Outside there's evidence of a past life, a life based around agriculture, an engine encased in rusting corrugated iron, machinery abandoned, and an upturned wheelbarrow, signifying that its working life is over. Nearby, close to the buyers, is a workshop in very poor state of repair, and a cursory glance inside left us with the impression that the building was unsafe. This building was used as the wash house and general store at the rear of the dwelling house. We've finally caught up with the main party as they make their way up the hill towards a group of cattle. Cyril advised us not to get too close to the animals. Looking back, little did we realise that this would be the start of a 25-year journey to the island, recording the changes and witnessing the evolution of a small herd of domestic cattle left to fend for themselves as they reverted back to nature and to become recognised as a special breed known as the Swona herd. The Lorita is once more preparing to leave for Swona. Aboard are John and Frida Finlay, and Peter Rowlands and his wife Debbie. Peter is a renowned underwater photographer and magazine publisher. 2 years have passed since we last landed on Swona, and we were keen to return to renew the experience, and with this in mind, Mungo had contacted Sir Lionel, who agreed to accompany us and give us a conducted tour of the island. With all the gear on board, we set off, our spirits high, and always hoping that the weather would be favourable. Cyril was making his own way, leaving for Hairston in his own boat, and had decided on a change of plan. While still at sea, Peter and Chon were to be transferred to his speedboat and given a trip around the coastline to places of interest. In the meantime, the Lorita would continue at a slower speed and would meet up at the haven. Our first port of call was to the sea cave at Garshnagal. This is where Cyril's slim craft came into its own, and his knowledge made the task look simple. Likewise, there was no apprehension being experienced by his passengers as he navigated the narrow channel into the gloop. Steep walls and cave-like with the roof open to the sky, while the scarfies were diving into the still water, having been disturbed on the nest.
Cave in there, it's in about 80 yards.
80 yards in.
Reversing his boat in the narrow confines of the gloop, he then manoeuvred it stern first into the opening of the large sea cave.
Come in here, no water. Do you want to go for a walk?
Yeah. Go for a walk up there. Oh, that'd be quite something.
Again,
Lovely. That's good.
don't put your fingers over the side of the boat now.
Heading south along the high shore of Swona, we encounter a group of Orkney penguins on a shelf of sloping rock. For a distance, this large colony of racerbills with their distinctive waddle looked like penguins tucked into the water. The Lorita is now lying tied off, clear of the concrete jetty and away for the submerged rocks. For a short time we were basking in hazy sunshine. Typical Orkney. The weather's now deteriorated and we have rain just as we're ready to begin our tour, and the camera gear has to be made showerproof. This property's been unoccupied for the past 16 years. Our first stop is at Cottage. Good thinking, Cyril. This'll take us out of the rain. Firstly, we're teen into the parlour, which is the wooden extension, and Cyril immediately winds up the old gramophone.
Good grief. Oh.
It's the golden I'm sticking.
His master's voice, eh?
Under 1910 sometime. Swona up to 1953. From Mrs. Kinman to all with best wishes. The new year. The date of that is 1962.
Oh, I gotcha.
She was still alive then, she lived several years after him. He made his money in a soft drinks firm down in Liverpool somewhere. And he came up to Orkney, 1930s sometime, and he bought Swona, Cobansey and Farah. I think he had Cava as well. It goes on, sort of kind of yuppie thing, you know.
Right.
Anything else?
You don't think of yourself as a yuppie though, Cyril, do you?
Me?
As a,
Good God! Doesn't work anymore. But then the first light here was in 1934. So when they first made electricity in Swona. The light came then, and this is his old radio transmitter. This is a converted army set. And this allowed him to tune in to the lighthouse broadcasts every morning. That was from 1951 until the time he left. This was just an ordinary Invicta radio with 9-wave bands that just happened to have the proper receiving band. This is batteries here underneath, a vibrator for taking the voltage up to 450 volts. A converter for converting 2.5 volts to 120 volts for operating this set off a 2-volt wet battery. This could be used to replace this type of battery, because you didn't always have dry batteries, and you'd run out of dry batteries, and you could use a wet sail with this to operate this part of the machinery. This operated using the 12-volt battery here through that.
Okay.
This is the Pennsylvania. A ship went ashore below the house here in 1931. It stayed for about 3, almost 4 months ashore. It was purchased equally by the people in Swona and Stroma, and I can tell you there wasn't much left in the end of 3 months.
Yes.
The site where the ship went ashore is just below the house here. You see the shiny bit in the water there? That's where the ship was.
This room just looks occupied as if it was still
Yeah.
people staying in this
Yeah,
house.
so there's no reason to do anything with it. The furniture's only worth a few pounds.
And when did the people actually vacate the island?
People left here in March 1974.
And was it a ploy to get them off the island?
No. They became ill.
They just became ill.
Became ill. Wasn't able to work anymore. In fact, my aunt left 4 years ago. Aunt
Yes.
Violet.
But it's just that everything just remains intact.
Aye.
Okay. Heavy. Go over to the dressing table. That paper.
salt. How could in it here?
Hang on a sec.
But
I'll just leave it
they've
there.
run out of food, wouldn't they?
Demand for these things, the old Victorian kettle for a cup of tea, dishcloths.
In the wartime, by my uncle, when he was on watch at the lighthouse, he made that just while he was there, by lamplight mostly.
Yes. So looking, I mean, on island of Swona, how many houses were occupied?
Roughly 5, usually about 5 houses. This was the Rosies' house here. This particular end of the house is built by my grandfather, James Rosie. He married the girl from next door, the Norqua lass, from
Yes.
up there, that's the farm up on the Bray.
Yes.
There was also Sebastans that lived at the far end of the island. There were Allans, they also lived at the far end of the island. There were Cromartys and Nicholsons that lived at the far end of the island. And they're all sort of integrated families to a certain extent.
Yes.
And mostly they were related, and they all eventually became related.
And was there a school on the island?
Yes, there was a school on the island. We just passed that a minute ago. The most kids that were there were 6. The school always operated in the summer, like between April and October. They had a long holiday all winter. Teacher used to go away.
The teacher left during the
Teacher
winter?
left during the winter. So they had school for 6 months, then no school for another 6 months.
Seems like a good idea.
My mother was the last one to go to the school. She eventually left and went to the Hope when she was 12.
Yeah. What kind of date are we talking about?
Oh, 1920s sometime.
The 1920s.
We're all agreed being allowed to see into the house was a real treat. However, an intriguing hole in the ground is being inspected, purpose unknown, before popping into the dairy while Cyril is locking up.
Corby's next. Raven.
Shortly after, we made our way to the workshop, where an unusual sight greets us. A Corby's nest
Yeah.
made of barbed wire.
Barbed wire. Built with barbed wire.
What were these for?
This was for regulating the current to the batteries. Is it, if the engine stopped and you didn't have this device, the engine would be driven on by the batteries.
Yes.
But this is what's got a cutout. That bit would there is a voltage regulator. That's just an ordinary voltmeter, so you know what was coming out of the dynamo. That's the feed to the house there. That one. That's the feed. The 3-wire feed from the dynamo.
Were these people all self-taught, or did they have any training, or it's just pure improvisation? Really?
His the house was first wired to an American diagram my uncle got out of a magazine in 1933-34, and when I remember first, all the switches were on upside down. You put them up
Yes.
for on,
Yes.
because apparently in America all the switches work up rather than what they do down in this country.
Yes.
Proceeding now up the hill to the croft of Upthra to see the cattle.
You still need a bit closer.
Well, no, I'm fine.
Just step over the deck.
So we've got 2 bulls there by the looks of it, haven't we?
Ball, 3, 4.
Yeah.
They're all going to circle now.
Yeah.
I think there's 19 cattle there, maybe a couple of bulls somewhere else. They come in 3 colours roughly. You get black ones, red ones and white ones. And there's a touch of grey in some of them and a touch of different shades of red up to black. That's the 3 main colours that come in. See a bull off there to the right, looking a bit mean. See the tail going? Yes. The ears sticking out like bats. Certainly are. Go back through the rest. You see a white one there staring at us. There's 2. There's a cow at the lower side there, that black one, just staring at us. That bull that's in the middle, that's one with the dark red head. He's not too worried.
Leaving the cattle to their own devices, we were then taken to the south of the island, to the Loch of the Tarf, and we see the stone cruise and the lighthouse which is maintained by Cyril under contract to the Northern Lighthouse Board. This is West Winnieskerry, and the fast-flowing ebb tide is in full spate between the rocks. A grey seal appears to be casually languishing in this tidal pool, listening to Cyril's whistling. Time is pressing, and Cyril is now taking us back to the haven, using the scenic route along the high shore. At last we get the chance to get close up to this seabird colony of puffins and racerbills. Having been in the gloop earlier by boat, we can now appreciate the true size of this feature, which splits the Swona landscape, a massive sea cave formed over eons of time, and then part of its roof collapsed, leaving this impressive geological feature. Looking down the hill towards the north of the island, we're leaving Swona on a dull, overcast day, but our spirits haven't been dampened. Lots to talk about, and many memories to cherish. We've returned to Swona on a glorious summer's day, flat calm with wall-to-wall sunshine. With the tide ebbing, we've decided to beach the rib alongside the slipway. This'll speed things up when we come to leave the island. We'd already decided that we'd devote this trip to spending most of the time with the Puffins. And then the fog rolls in. Nothing for it but to have an early lunch at the haven and wait for the fog to clear. It's now a beautiful day, and before heading out, we spend a little time filming these abandoned items at the head of the haven, the tractor and the hood, which is in sad condition and wholly unseaworthy. The cattle have dislodged the hood for its upright position, and it's now just a mere shadow of its former sail. Making our way south for the haven, following a route along the high shore, we sight our first puffins, perched on the rocky ledges. The puffin is one of the most popular seabirds in Orkney. It's a small auk and can be seen between May and early August. The east coast of the island of Swona is the perfect place for these seabirds, and the rocky ledges provide perfect take-off and landing platforms for their fishing excursions. The puffin flies with a very fast wing beat and appears ungainly in flight. At first sight, when coming into land, it gives the appearance of crash landing at high speed. However, the short, powerful wings make the puffin an expert diver, and its comical clownish beak can hold a surprising number of sand eels. This is the southeast tip of Swona, with a prominent sea stack called the Southclate. In the foreground are the grassy banks, where the puffins have their burrows. Mungo is first to venture down the slope to get closer to the action and secures a safe location to begin filming. We soon learn that by offloading much of our gear and crawling, we can get closer to the birds. Lying in such close proximity to the puffins and keeping still, it's as if we'd become part of the landscape, and the birds seem to accept our presence. The sea pinks which carpet these banks had lost their colour, but were gently blowing in the breeze, which acted like a stage setting for filming the puffins. Moving carefully, it was possible, within reason, to get to other vantage points and to continue filming the birds as they gied about their business. On a rocky ledge at sea level, there's a line of scarfish and an inquisitive grey seal trying to keep us in sight. From our vantage point, we're looking down at the base of the Southclate. It's low water and the ebb tide is beginning to flow through the narrow channel. These grey seals have hauled out to rest on their favourite ledges. Submerged rocks are exposed, and these are now valuable haul-out sites. We get a rare glimpse of the seal in total relaxation mode. The water around the sea stack, called the Southclate, is relatively shallow and extremely tidal, and noted for its good fishing at certain states of the tide. In addition, it's not uncommon to witness the water begin to boil, with disturbed sand eels trying to escape the predator fish and seabirds that chase them. The gulls too are hoping for a picking. On our way back, we had another treat in store. The herd of cattle are grazing at Upthra, and Mungo sets off to get closer. And as Mungo was filming the cattle, Joan was filming him, but ready at all times to make a quick exit up the wall of a nearby ruinous outbuilding. In these closing scenes, the bulls are free to wander about the buildings at Cottage. These empty houses are a reminder of times past on this deserted island, and the once domestic herd of cattle have increased in number, but still remain grazing contentedly on the most arable part of Swona, which lies between Cottage and the croft of Upthra on the side of the hill.